Is that coming through your earphones? I can hear him through your. Good evening, and welcome to a special edition of Inside Government, a show produced here at CU Community College and broadcast on Spectrum, Verizon Fios, the Auburn Regional Media Access, better known as ARMA, as well as Win 89.1 for the fall 2022 semester. I'm your host, Guy Cosentino. Currently, CU County and Onondaga County are part of the 24th Congressional District, represented by John Cacco. With the 2020 census, New York ended up losing at least one House seat in the House of Representatives. And as part of the decennial redistricting, there is a new 24th Congressional District, and Congressman Cacco is not only not in that district, he's decided not to run for re-election. The new 24th District covers all or parts of 12 counties, including CU County. The new 24th includes Genesee, Livingston, Ontario, Oswego, Seneca, Wayne, Wyoming, and Yates, as well as portions of Jefferson, Niagara, and Orleans counties. So it's a big district. As per our past practice, we have set up a series of forums for this year for Congress and the New York State Legislature, and we'll talk to you about the two legislative forums next week at the end of this hour. We did invite Congresswoman Claudia Tenney to join us for the forum for the redrawn 24th Congressional District, and she or her campaign decided not to respond to the invitation. As has been this show's policy since about 2006, if one candidate is willing to appear, they have a one-on-one interview with me for that same time period. This allows us to question a candidate about their background and their views, and in many cases introduce them to the voters before Election Day. With that in mind, we are delighted to have Democrat Steve Holden, who is running for the 24th Congressional seat, in our studio to talk about his campaign, tell us about himself, and what's going on in the 24th District. Welcome to Inside Government. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So just some basics. We were talking beforehand as we were setting up. You declared you were running a year ago, more than a year ago.
Yes, that's true.
So besides the more basic question, I think this is what we call the Edward Kennedy question. Why are you running?
Well, I've spent most of my life in public service. I am a retired Army lieutenant colonel with over 20 years of service, and public service has been in my blood for a long time. I originally was looked to run back in 2018 and had the support from Democrats, not just here in state, but in D.C., but ended up getting recalled back to active duty and could not do that. So when I had the first chance here in the 2022 cycle, because 2020 was COVID, I was in Afghanistan for a while. I didn't have the opportunity there, but in 2022, in the first chance I had to throw my hat in the ring, I did. I've been in the race probably longer than most challengers in this entire state.
So you originally were going to run against John Cacco.
That is correct.
So were you running, whether it was 4 years ago or just this time, were you running because you wanted to run against John Cacco, or you wanted to run for a seat in Congress?
Running for a seat in Congress. That's really what I wanted to do. I worked on political campaigns back all the way going back to 1990 in the state of Oklahoma, back when that was a bluer state. I was a Young Democrats campus chair at that time. I did a lot of work there before I went into the United States Army. But it was more of a sense of service, seeing a call to duty and a call to action. Because to me, and we'll hear during this next hour, something that's very important to me is I took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States. And my belief is that our democracy is in peril. And like other veterans who are running across the state this year, all the way from the southern tier down to Long Island, we all feel a call to duty to do this in order to protect our constitutional values.
Are you surprised that you ended up running in a district with Claudia Tenney?
We knew redistricting was going to happen. There were several different scenarios where we thought we could be going up against Congresswoman Tenney. Anything from, if they redistricted and put her against Congressman Cacco, all the way
because that was originally one of the thoughts, was to put the two of them and they'd fight each other in a primary to start with.
Correct. And then she went down to the 23rd. I was then put into the new 24th, which has parts of the old 24th in it, like you said, Cayuga, but also with Wayne and Oswego. But we thought there could be a chance to do that. And in
between John Katko and Claudia Tenney, you were running against a different Republican congressional candidate.
Yes, and between that, it was Chris Jacobs. And so I'm now running against my third different Republican incumbent. And all three of those individuals are ideologically different. And so it's been a challenge, besides the fact we've been in the race for so long. Besides, we're on our fifth different set of congressional lines. Running against a third different Republican, we've had to change strategies a number of times.
So some basic questions about you.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you live?
I live in Camillus right now. It's just a little bit outside the district, but with redistricting, it kind of happened. One of the things I was thinking about on the way over, so in 24, you have me as the Democratic nominee running out here who lives a couple of miles outside. And then 22, you have a guy living here in Cayuga County that's running over in Onondaga County. But you have cases like this across the state.
So does that mean that if you're elected, you will move into the district?
In fact, my wife and I are debating where we're going to go, looking at places like Auburn or Oswego, a number of different places like that.
So you mentioned Oklahoma. We'll get to that in a second. But how long have you lived in central New York?
Well, I got here in 2006, and when I went to Syracuse University, I'll talk about that in a minute. And so I'd been on active duty a lot. We tried to get back here to central New York numerous times.
But you had family that goes way back here. In fact, I was looking at your website, and I think when I was at SU, I used to pass by a building named after your grandfather?
It goes back several greats on
several
that.
greats, okay.
And it's the Holdens, when they migrated over, came through central New York, down through Ohio, Kentucky, Missouri, and then down into the Oklahoma, Kansas area.
So you're originally from Oklahoma?
Yes.
You grew up on a reservation there?
No, I grew up on a dairy farm.
A dairy farm, but did your dad work on the reservation?
My dad worked for a while. He worked for Yellow Freight Lines, and then most recently he worked for the Modoc Nation.
Okay.
And that's on reservation land, but worked with a number of other tribal agencies. There are 9 of them there in the town I grew up in.
9
tribal agencies.
Okay. And we're going to get to that at the end. We'll get to that because you do cover some part of Seneca counties in this district. We'll talk about that. So are you of Native American heritage?
Yes, I am. Cherokee, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Choctaw.
And did you go to grade and secondary school in Oklahoma?
Yes, I did. I all the way up through my bachelor's degree. I went to school there in Oklahoma.
And so you're okay. Where did you go to college?
At a place called. So I started off at Northeastern Oklahoma A&M College, very similar to this, and then I went, married my first wife. We moved, who actually unfortunately just passed away on primary night here a few weeks ago. Moved down to Edmond, Oklahoma, just north of Oklahoma City. I went to the University of Central Oklahoma and got my degree in political science.
So I'm not even going to ask if you're a Sooner or an SU guy. We're not going to.
I'll tell you this. We are in a little bit of a living, as they say on the show, Stranger Things, in the upside down, where one is doing a lot better than the other one this year.
And
I'm happy for my. I'm a proud SU grad, and so go Orange. They're going on. They're doing well this year.
So you went into the military.
Mm-hmm.
Did you go in as enlisted, or did you go in as an officer?
So I went in. So there's something called the simultaneous membership program, and so when cadets go in, their first 2 years, they have the ability to simultaneously serve in either the Guard or the Reserve. So you did take an oath of enlistment for the first 2 years, which as a cadet equivalent, you did officer type jobs, but you were considered enlisted. And then I got my commission in 1998.
And where did you serve?
Well, several different places. Besides going to schools in Georgia, South Carolina. I was at Fort Jackson, South Carolina when 9/11 happened. I remember us all sitting around the table and going, "We're deploying. We're going off to war, guys." In between, I was at Joint Base Lewis McChord, formerly Fort Lewis. I served there as an infantryman. And then I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Then after that, I came here to SU to get my degrees. Went to MacDill Air Force Base down in Florida. And I was there with U.S. Central Command, where we managed it. Then went to Fort Leavenworth, Fort Carson, back to Fort Leavenworth, Fort Knox, and then retired.
But you saw service in both Iraq and Afghanistan?
2 tours apiece.
And what rank did you retire as?
Lieutenant Colonel.
So are you still active in the reserves?
No, I do not. I'm fully retired.
You said first wife, so that sounds like you're married again?
Yes, I am.
So you're married. How long have you been married to your current wife?
Since February 18th of 2007. Her name is Julie, and she is from Liverpool.
And you get points for remembering the date and the
yes, I do.
Do you have children?
Yes, I have. So for my first marriage, I have a son who's getting ready to turn 30 this year, right after the election on the 16th. I have my daughter. His name is Wes. My daughter Paige turns 29 on the 27th of this month. My stepson Christian just turned 29 on August 25th, and he is a staff sergeant in the U.S. Air Force Reserves, stationed at Fort Joint Base Dix McGuire Lakehurst in New Jersey, and he's a graduate of Monmouth University.
And what is your current occupation besides campaigning in the 24th?
So 2 things. One is I started a business where actually the best man in my wedding and fellow veteran started a business helping veterans win government contracts, doing production videos very similar to what we're doing right now, teaching them the ins and outs of how to do business, how the way the federal government works, how the way budget and contracting and program management works so they can live their dreams. And I'm also on a leave of absence from another government contractor where I teach those same subjects to the federal government. So I've been working on that since right after COVID hit, all the way up until March, April of this year. So roughly,
so you're not a lobbyist, but you are training people how to get government contracts and whatnot.
And I have found that for any of the things I'm going to look to advocate, the policies we'll talk about tonight and I talk about in the campaign trail, I've actually already started to plant the seed with some of these folks. So when I get to D.C., I'll already know the people who are going to be implementing those policies so they can work better for my constituents.
Have you ever held elective office? I know you said you were a young Democrat.
Yes, I was. I was a campus chair there. Haven't held elective office, but a lot of us who are veterans across the state, this is our first foray into it, and we have lived good and bad federal policy for most of our careers.
So let's talk about a couple of issues. We'll get back to bio maybe in a few minutes. What do you think your top priority as a member of Congress would be?
Restoring and protecting democracy.
So how do you do that? So you have on your website, I think I read on there that you are concerned about MAGA. I've got it here. MAGA extreme Republicans. Is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about something much broader?
Well, it's a symptom of what's happened with MAGA, ultra MAGA. Now, I want to say this, is that there are a lot of Republicans out there, kind of what I would call Liz Cheney, John McCain type Republicans who have reached out to us, who are supporting us.
By the way, 8 years ago, you wouldn't call them moderates.
No, you wouldn't. But those are people that put country above party and understood their oath to the Constitution. Just like late Senator McCain, he swore an oath to the Constitution with his military service, much like I did. And that meant something to him. When we take a look at the ultra MAGA movement, there seems to be a disregard for the rule of law. And if you don't have the rule of law and the tenet that bases all the way back to the Magna Carta, then our system of government breaks down. If there are some people, or particularly one person, who can be above the law, who can never do anything wrong, then the other laws don't mean anything at that point.
I want to get into some of that and flesh that out, but I want to ask some general constituency type questions about this.
Sure.
So do you see your job as a member of Congress, if you're elected, as making policy or constituent service?
So I hate to sound like the political answer, but at this point in time, it's both.
Okay. It can be. I just want to know what you're.
Oh, very much. So one, there's a lot of lawmaking that has to be done. Whether it's protecting voting rights, protecting women's and reproductive rights, other constitutional issues that could be on the table, preserving democracy, making sure that when the people vote, that it's their will, regardless of who wins, that's said, instead of this independent legislature idea. But constituent services, and this is where we'll talk a little bit more about my bio, but we have a diverse district. This is like you said, a very large district with a.
I think your campaign you call it the Lake District.
Yes, we do, and because it has everything from Lake Ontario, Oneida Lake, it has the Finger Lakes in it. It has several different waterways. It has the Erie Canal, the Black River, the Niagara River, and the Flight of Five out in Lockport. So several different waterways and bodies of water here. That's the lifeblood of the district, either farming, wineries, apples, to tourism.
I'm going to get far afield on here, but you just mentioned the size of this district. How do you campaign in a district that has 12, all or part of 12? I know Sam Stratton decades ago had what was called the Thruway District, and I always thought that was a large district. This most likely is one of the larger districts in the state. Now.
Yeah, it's just smaller than the Stefanik Castelli race.
Okay.
And I was just talking.
But they got a lot of forests up there.
There's a lot of it in the big middle of the Adirondacks where people don't live. There's consistent.
You got cities, towns, villages, pretty much 6 or 7 golf swings along the way.
Yeah, all the way from Clayton to go down under to Lockport. So 2 things on it. One, we talk about constituent services, is you have to be kind of a utility infielder on this. You have to be able to understand or have a background of the different types of constituents that are in your district. So, being retired military, there are a lot of veterans and active duty military up in Jefferson County. Now, we don't have Fort Drum, but we have the anchor city, and there's a lot of people there that live there. And then through, like I said, the different types of agricultural area. Again, growing up on a dairy farm, I was on the FFA and 4-H in high school. And then we'll talk.
For those city folks, that's Future Farmers of America.
And yes, the Future Farmers of America, which is another thing that I would like to work through the Education Department and Department of Agriculture to get more of those programs out.
So is there any specific legislation you would like to see passed?
So, well, first of all, before we do anything, we have to get judicial reform done. The Supreme Court does not have a code of ethics. We have questionable behavior, to say the least, from setting Supreme Court justices.
So would you expand? So there's been, since the decision that impacted Roe, and we'll get to that in a little bit, would you change the size of the court?
Yes, I'd go, and the intent of the federal law that was enacted to do it. What a lot of people may not know is the current size of the Supreme Court goes back to prior legislation that held it at 9, but we had 9 circuits. Then the intent was that you had one Supreme Court justice that kind of oversees one particular circuit.
I believe Donald Trump is trying to approach one of those justices now.
I'll talk about that a little bit here in a minute. That gets back to why we need a code of ethics. But if we had it at 13, and it's not court packing, this is actually keeping with federal law and the growth of our country. We're now 330 million people.
Would you say the same thing about the size of Congress? So it's been 450, and there's been stories in the Public Interest and other magazines that have said, because you're going to represent how many people in this
770,000.
That's a lot of people. Is
A lot
it
of
time
people-
for Congress? And I know if you go to the Diet in Japan, you go to other places, they have much larger
bodies.
and we should say they also have more of a parliamentary system,
Correct.
which can screw things up beyond all belief.
Just ask our Canadian brothers and sisters
So,
in the North.
so is it time to look at not only the judiciary and how you on that side, but also expand the number of congressional seats so that you would reduce the number of people who are in a given congressional district?
And this gets back to what we're talking about with constituent services. So do you want quantity over quality? And this is something I hear talking to other people who are running or who have served in Congress and say that's a Rubik's Cube. That's a Rubik's Cube question. I think it is time to expand that, because once you start getting to the size of these districts, and some viewers may or may not know, we were just 88 people getting their census forms in from keeping 27 congressional districts. So that's for all of us running this year, regardless of what party you are. That's frustrating to know you probably find that many people on one floor of a high rise in Manhattan, or probably here in Auburn you'd find that.
So you mentioned judicial reform and ethical reform. Would you also put term limits on members of the Supreme Court?
So it's a 1-2 punch. I've spoken with a number of people who have said, which would you do, either or? I would do both, for two reasons. The size of the court, I believe, has to do with the size of the country, much like we just spoke about the size of Congress. The term limits, it's somebody should not have a guaranteed job for life. If we have to look back at the origins of the Constitution, life expectancy wasn't as much lower. So look at people in both sides of the ideological aisle and how long that they served. So yes, I do.
Would you do the same for Congress with term limits?
I do. Okay. That was kind of the same intent. Originally, members of Congress were citizen statesmen, and so they would go they would be a farmer or a small business owner, a craftsman in the area, go and serve their community, and then go back home. We should. I think that part of the problem with money in politics, part of the problem with just adequate representation, is that we've had people there a long time in both parties, and it's time to get new blood in there to start talking about some of the issues that are on the people's mind. It makes you more, it gives you a greater sense of, okay, I only have, let's say, 6 years to get what I want to get done. I'll run for 3 times, and that's it. So it gives more of a urgency to get to handle our problems, because you don't have that much time to do it.
Before turning to the race itself, I do want to let our viewers know, and we'll do this another time as well before the end, is that we have in the studio with us Stephen Holden, who's on the Democratic line, running for the 24th Congressional District. This is a new district that covers all or parts of 12 counties, including Cayuga and Oswego County, which are served by this college, as well as Seneca and a number of others. We did invite his opponent, Congresswoman Claudia Tenney. Either she or her campaign decided not to respond to the invitation, and is past policy that we've been using for the last decade and a half or more. If one candidate agrees to participate, we give them that timeline. So in a one-on-one interview, rather than having Jeremy Boyer here, we'll be here next week for the legislative races. How much have you raised in this campaign so far?
Probably so. Not a lot. I'll tell you about probably only about what'll end up probably be somewhere between 250 to 3. But the reason, because it comes back to what we're saying, I take no corporate PAC money.
So I was going to say, where does it? So of the two, let's just use a round number, 250. Of the 250, where does that come as a percentage?
All but maybe a small percent comes from PACs. It all comes from people living here in the district.
Only a small percentage. I want to make sure.
For like unions who might get involved, other members of Congress who would give to help out. We got a contribution from Congresswoman Grace Ming from down in the city just a few days ago.
Do you know how much your opponents raised?
Probably about 10 times that. And
so how do you overcome that financial advantage in a district that's 12 counties?
Well, we're strategic. Nearly all of my campaign staff is volunteer. And these are people with years of corporate and political background. For example, the gentleman who is running our social media is doing this on a volunteer basis, and he was the social media director for Senator Gillibrand. So you have a number of people who have served in these capacities, but because of the readiness of now, you see that happen. And if those people had salaries that were actually out, we would probably be over the $1 million mark with what these people would normally be worth.
So as you know, if you go a couple of miles that way from this studio, I believe the Democratic Congressional Committee is heavily involved in that seat.
Yes, and in fact, I just spoke with my good friend Fran earlier today.
So is a Democratic Congressional Committee involved in your race?
No, and this allows us to have some independence.
How do you? So are you able to make media buys? And when I say media buys, you have a district that is covered by a lot of different television stations. So are you buying media?
So we have a little bit different of a strategy. I was up at an event about a week ago. And for folks, if you're running for office, the days just kind of end up running into each other on this. We were talking with Congressman Joe Morelli out of Rochester. And we were talking about that exact issue. He goes, hey, I just have the Rochester market. It's pretty easy for me. You have 5 media markets. The three more major cities, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo. But you have the Finger Lakes region and you have parts of the North Country. How do you do it? Well, part of our strategy is a 21st century strategy, which there's a lot of digital targeting. So we have ads coming out there targeted, let's say, to veterans or targeted to right here in the central part of the district or toward women or younger voters. So we have some more what I would call targeted digital ads. But we also are to close out this campaign, we are going to be going to a lot of radio stations. Almost like a 1970s, 80s type strategy. Because when you do large ad buys in some of these other markets, if I was to do that in Syracuse, the majority of people watching Syracuse media live in the 22nd, not the 24th. Right. And so you're wasting a lot of money doing things like that. And my opponent did that in the primary, and there's a chance she's going to do this in the general. We'll let them spend that money that way. We're going to be more targeted and strategic.
So you mentioned your opponent. Do you have any debates scheduled with her?
We do have one on the 26th up in Watertown.
So have you asked her to do others? Has she asked you to do more? Where are you in that process?
So this is something rather ironic, and it's kind of interesting when an incumbent wants to do a bunch of debates. So her not coming here is kind of a shock. Is that both campaigns want to do more debates. But we've been told by some markets that they don't want to do debates, that they don't want to have it.
But you could find it in 12 counties. You could find people. Well, I'm not talking about just televised debates. You have leagues of women's voters. You have young professionals group getting forms. The question is, while you might be participating, is she participating with it?
That's the one on the 26th, the only one that she has said that she's going to do, but she has approached other ones, and our campaigns have both been working together to get the candidates.
So you are still looking at other.
We are still looking at other ones.
So she wants to do it. You're looking for venues.
I think we're looking for venues and we're looking for avenues. So wherever it is, that would be great.
Okay. You grew up in Oklahoma. I would not exactly consider that a bastion of liberalism. Having several friends, I say that with a very good friend who lives in the state of Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. If you had to put yourself on the political spectrum of the United States right now, where are you on the spectrum?
I would call myself. I would say I'm more toward the liberal side, but it's more what I call it's kind of, there's an old term called a plains populist way back in the day. It's kind of a rural middle America stand up for the little guy type of politics.
Where would you put Claudia Tenney?
I would put her on the pretty close to the far right.
Where are you on the spectrum when it comes to fiscal issues?
On the spectrum of fiscal issues, I am probably a little left of center on that. When we start talking about tax fairness, it's too long that we have wealth concentrated up at the very top, and we have people across this district, regardless of party, who aren't getting a fair shake. And so when we see billionaires sending themselves into outer space instead of helping their fellow man here on Earth, that's a problem. And so that's kind of where I consider myself on that, just from a practical sense.
And on social issues?
Social issues, I also consider myself liberal to progressive on those. Of course, we're going to be talking about the Dobbs decision, especially in this district. This district has a history of social progressivism, whether that's right here in Cayuga County. We go over to Harriet Tubman's home. Go right next door. We have Seneca Falls, the birthplace of the women's suffrage movement. We have the Liberty Party in Wyoming County, which was one of the first abolitionists. We have Safe Haven up in Oswego County, where Holocaust survivors came.
So we talk. I just on the social issues. You mentioned about the issue of ethics in the courts. You mentioned money in politics. Is there any? What would you say when you've talked to voters in the new 24th?
Mm-hmm.
What are their top 3 issues, and do you align with those top issues?
I do, and it happens to be, like I said, kind of a synergy that's happening. Number one, I hear one is protecting democracy. If you take a look, I keep going back to this because it's like, regardless of party, hey, we might not agree on everything, but let's agree right now to save what we have with this country, and then let's disagree later and let's work through some things and actually get something done. Second, the second important thing, we do talk about inflation. And as a Democrat, I don't shy away from talking about inflation. What we have a problem in this country is with venture capital firms, used to be people, vernacular trusts, who are raising prices on things. We just seen that even though gas prices are coming down, OPEC and OPEC Plus have decided, Mohammed bin Salman and Vladimir Putin have decided to cut production to ramp up gas prices as sort of an October surprise. Voters can see through that. As well as...
Do you think President Biden got played by the Saudis on that?
I honestly, I do believe he did. I think it's been... this is my personal belief. I guess
I'm asking, did he get anything for his fist bump?
I don't think he did. It's... He has a long background in foreign relations, with it being the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, well respected around the world. But I strongly believe that the Saudis, and again, I've spent a lot of time in the greater Middle East. They're interested in money, doing whatever. They're interested in what the Saudis are going to want. And the prior administration gave them everything they wanted.
Third issue, anything else in there?
The third issue, we get back to we get back to women's rights again. We need to have somebody that honors the history of this district, and we have everything, like I said, from Memorial Day to It's a Wonderful Life, which is supposedly based in Seneca Falls. But we hear from women across the district, regardless of political party. We see a number of Republican women contacting us and go, enough. This is the first time that the Supreme Court has stripped rights away, and more are coming. So they're going to put the fact that, hey, you're right, your reproductive rights is going to be an important issue here.
So as we saw in Kansas, where I think most people thought that
very familiar with the politics of Kansas. Yes.
Well, Leavenworth, I think that's in Kansas.
Yes, it
is. Their voters surprised the pundits and the pollsters by rejecting a ban just after Dobbs, correct?
That is absolutely correct. And that whole election.
So do you think there's an underlying that we don't know yet? And obviously this would be something that you might think is helpful to you, is that there is an underlying view that women are not responding to pollsters, but they're going to show up on election day and vote for those who are for rights versus those who might agree with the Dobbs decision or saying that it should go back to states.
And we have three examples of that. First, my good friend now, Congressman Pat Ryan, very similar type situation. He is predicted to lose by 20 points, won by 2. Veterans such as myself, we can debate which one of us veterans has the better beard, but similar type situation. We look what happened in Alaska. Also, and not just that, there was an indigenous candidate versus an ultra MAGA candidate. Very similar here, won there. We take a look at Kansas, which voted for President Trump by 15 points, but then also supported abortion rights by only 15. So there's a 30-point flip in an election that was designed to favor the anti-abortion movement, and it ended up backfiring on them.
So I want to ask you a couple of other national questions before we get into specific issues. President Biden is now completing, I think, if I'm doing my math right, roughly 21st month in office. How do you think he's doing?
Well, it's sort of we have to wait and see. But so far, a lot of the things he's doing are helping this area. And I particularly look at something like the CHIPS Act. So we look at what Micron's doing in the next county over in Clay. But that's going to have an impact here because this is going to bring jobs to this area and good paying jobs. Out in the other part of on the far western part of the district, at Genesee County in the city of Alabama, New York, there's going to be another facility that's out there. So it is bringing good paying jobs, as well as we take a look at things like the Infrastructure Investment Act, where we have rural broadband. This is a rural district. You cannot operate in a 21st century economy, regardless if you have a farm, a small business, if you're an educator, unless you have good broadband.
All right, so we'll come back to Joe Biden in a second. Let's take him piece by piece because you just mentioned 3 interesting things. So on the issue of Micron, there is a Republican candidate running in a different district who has, I believe their phrase was, this was corporate welfare.
I find it humorous.
Why is it humorous?
Because we take a look at the corporate welfare in other agencies. The difference is this is investment. What corporate welfare is what's going on in things like Big Ag, where you have monopolization and consolidation, and then money, subsidies and tax breaks going to those into the small businesses. This is the government acting as a venture capitalist. That is corporate welfare.
So what role should government play, if anything, in, you mentioned a rural, thinking again, second most rural district in the state right now is what the 24th will look like. And I know that some people are still using dial-up, unfortunately.
Yes, they are.
So what role should Washington be playing to get affordable high-speed internet? Or is that a private sector?
The problem is it's much like I take a look at broadband as the 2022 version of when we had the interstate highway program back in the 1950s under President Eisenhower. That had to be a massive federal government program because of the scale that we're talking about. Same thing goes here. Because of the scale of it, it has to be a nationwide program. Now, they can work with businesses, but whoever is, I'm thinking like kind of government finance and contract hat on here, we need though to develop, we need to take a look at the way that we send the money to the states, in that we don't want it to go into states and then there's a monopoly somewhere and consumers end up with jacked up prices. So this needs to be earmarked to go to states who have some sort of utilities commission or corporation commission to where they can regulate it like a utility. If not, it's going to be way too expensive. Or we require for there to be competition.
And would you? Are there any other items that you think from the nation's capital should be a priority when it comes to infrastructure?
Well, we got to get to roads and bridges, as well as our nation's grid and power supply. This district also is the home of 2 nuclear sites, and so we need to keep reinvesting in that and making sure that we have good, clean energy, and those nuclear reactors continue to operate in a safe way, because the state of New York relies on that so much that those need to be upgraded, and those continue also there needs to be public sector investment in it. Doesn't mean it has to be completely public sector, but there has to be some sort of either a public-private partnership or, again, the government working as a venture capitalist to get it started.
And I just want to clarify, part of the Micron deal was dependent upon legislation that was passed a couple of months ago and signed into law by President Biden. You would have supported that.
I would have supported that, because it's not just the fact that it's economics. There's also the talk of, I see this as a national security issue, because it's bringing jobs back and it's bringing production back from China. So there's a lot of talk about it.
There's a worry that most of the chips that come from Taiwan might not be there a year from now.
Correct. So, because the Taiwanese they're living a life very similar to what the Ukrainians are looking at right now, with sort of an imperial mega power that's lording over them. So this is a national security issue on top of that, to bring that, because if not, I mean, the studio, our phones, our cars, everything requires access to affordable microchips.
I want to go back to the president for just a moment. The president turns 80 in the next month or so. Should he run as your party's nominee in 2024?
Personally, and this just isn't in and out, it's completely up to him. We've had older presidents before. I think we have to take a look.
Well, I don't know if we've had an older somebody elected.
Yes. So if he does decide to,
would you vote for him for a second term?
This is a similar question that came up on a radio station a couple weeks ago. I have to see kind of where things are. If he's not, if for example he does have health problems and does step aside, is somebody else going to come to the forefront? Is Vice President Harris going to? I have to keep my mind open to see what's going on, and it's not out. It's just in politics, as you know, a lot can happen in 2 years. So we just kind of have to have a wait and see moment on it.
Before going on to our next subject, I wanted to let viewers know we are here with Stephen Holden, who is running for the new 24th Congressional District, which covers 12 counties in upstate New York. He is running against Claudia Tenney, who represents a district currently east of here. We invited both for a forum to take place today here. You responded. She nor her campaign did, and so that's why you are here for an hour to do an interview, and we're about 2/3 of the way through. Okay. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Do you think there was fraud in the 2020 election?
No. And President Trump's own election security in Homeland Security, the civilian information security agency came back and even said this is the most secure election in the history of America.
From what you have read about the raid on Mar-a-Lago, do you think Trump should be charged for any crimes?
Yes. And I can tell you, as someone who still holds an active security clearance, when I saw that and I saw the types of documents that were there, there's a visceral reaction that you have, because those documents are to be treated almost like loaded weapons. They can't be out there. And if I would have done that, I would already be sitting in trial, and I might be sitting in Fort Leavenworth right now. So absolutely. And if they're with the nuclear,
let's just make it clear,
sure.
You could have left Fort Leavenworth when you were stationed there.
Yes,
you were not a resident.
No. I was an instructor when I was there. So go ahead.
So I want to ask you. So there's obviously since we came on, or when we came on today, We're taping around 3 o'clock here on Thursday the 13th. It does look like the January 6th committee is going to vote next week on whether or not to subpoena Donald Trump. Should they?
Yes.
So I'm taking from your comments you are supporting the work of the January 6th.
Yes, I am. This gets back to my support of the rule of law.
So going back to this, I mentioned you said on your website, you say mega extreme Republicans. Again, define who they are.
So these are the people who put party over country. And they put more fealty to an individual, a man, rather than to the principles of the Constitution.
So what's your long-term concern about that?
My long-term concern, one, we get back to what I said about the rule of law. If they want him to be some sort of permanent leader, so whatever term they want.
That word is called dictator.
It is absolutely called a dictator.
So is that your worry?
That's my worry, is that if we throw it out, we will be like places where I've been on this earth. I believe that one of President Trump's supporters, a gentleman who I used to work with, General Mike Flynn, wanted a Myanmar-style overthrow of the government, where you had a democratic election, and then the military just decided nope and to take over. That's my fear, and if that can happen, then our democratic institutions at that point mean nothing. What we've done for 250 years just goes by the wayside.
Do you consider your opponent, Claudia Tenney, a MAGA Republican?
I'll use her own words. I was Trump before Trump.
So let's go on to some issues. Abortion. You talked about the Dobbs decision. The Supreme Court recently overturned the longstanding Roe v. Wade not statute, but the longstanding policy. Should abortions be legal?
Yes.
Would you place any restrictions, such as not allowing them in the third trimester?
I would leave that up to medical professionals. We would have to look at that, but I believe that Roe versus Wade should have stood, and we should protect it at all costs. Because there are oftentimes cases where in the third trimester, and I'll quote Secretary Pete Buttigieg in his response to it, that often at that time families have named the child. They already have the baby clothes. They have the nursery there. When things like that happen, it isn't just willy-nilly. A lot of times that is a traumatic decision. But for whatever reason, that woman should have control over their own body. And for whatever reason, it's nobody's business. And if they do put these burdens on abortion rights access, sometimes it's with the intent to push it on so far into the pregnancy that the woman is kind of forced into it. So that's something else we have to think about. But in the third trimester, those are a very small number, and generally those are medically necessary. The child is unviable or the woman's health is at risk.
I stumbled over the word precedent for Roe v. Wade. Should what was allowed under Roe v. Wade be nationally codified?
Yes.
Should there be a parental notification if someone is under the age of 16 and wants to have an abortion?
No, and I'll go back to the case of what happened with the 10-year-old child in Ohio. Very often, I've had women in my life. I have 3 younger sisters. I have 3 sisters. I know a lot of women who have been sexually assaulted. Some of them who are, while they're as a teenager, some of them younger than that. They might have parents who, don't necessarily agree, but oftentimes that means that it's embarrassing, especially with a lot of ways in our country where we sometimes our heart, I'm trying to find the right word, where we end up blaming the victim. They have to live with that for the rest of their lives. So if that teenage girl, and by the way, girl, that is a child, if something happens, they should be able to go get that taken care of, because that is a very private decision.
Do you believe in universal health care?
I believe I do believe in access to health care for all.
So in doing that, how would you pay for it?
So first of all, what we would take. So when I was in the military, I had some of the best health care on the planet. And now with the VA, I have really good health care, even though the VA is not fully funded, and that's a separate issue I can get into. But we pay for it several different ways. Number one, there's only one federal agency that has never been audited, and that's DOD. And there's a lot of waste. I know for a fact there's a lot of waste that goes there, so we could take some of that, as well as going back and talking about tax fairness. If billionaires were to pay, the ultra wealthy were to pay their fair share, and just even sometimes just a small bit more in taxes, we could fund big programs like that. So that's the way we would do it.
I want to switch a couple of things, switch this up a little bit. There is legislation pending to limit and restrict stock trades by members of Congress. Should it be passed?
Yes, it should be. To me, I believe that's tantamount to insider trading.
So they should be restricted.
They should be restricted. Look what happened during the pandemic, where we saw all those members of Congress that were doing that. They sold stock in one company and bought stock in Zoom. Yeah.
You mentioned the pandemic. I know the president said on 60 Minutes about a month ago, pandemic's over. Is it over?
There's some members of my staff who are catching it. So I think I don't believe we're out of it. I believe that I think we still need to be careful, and I'll leave that up to individuals on how to do that.
Should individuals get vaccinated?
I believe they should. Now, I understand there are some cases for medical reasons that they can't. But the reason that the rates have went down, and as someone, when I was in the military, I worked on a lot of pandemic responses, from everything from Ebola to bird flu. And vaccination strategies are the best way to limit it. People will still catch it, but people may not need to go to the hospital. And that's one of the reasons why we had the vaccinations, because our hospitals were just getting overran and our first line responders were just getting overwhelmed.
Let's go back to money for a second. The
Sure.
2010 Citizens United case seems to open up the floodgates of money in politics.
Yes, it does.
Would you put any limits?
I would end Citizens United.
So you would codify changes?
Absolutely. And I take a look at what we're doing. Like I said, we have been in this race for 15 months. And there are some of my opponents from both parties who have raised that much in a quarter just simply because we're not taking corporate PAC money. But it means more when it's coming from the people, that it's their investment. I mean, this district is vast. This district's also older. And you have a lot of people on fixed incomes in this district. And I believe that people inside the district should vote with their pocketbook versus getting money from Albany, Manhattan, D.C., or anywhere like that.
We've got about 5 minutes. I want to go through a lot of different subjects, so we're not going to get to
Absolutely.
all. Just real quickly, if Nancy Pelosi runs for speaker again, would you support her?
This gets back to I have to see who the other people are, and if she was the only one, I would. Yeah, I would have to see if there were any other challenges. Just like anything else, I have to kind of see the facts bear out before me.
Do you currently own a gun?
Yes, I do.
Do you support any limits on who can carry a gun?
So I support universal background checks for gun sales. We should not criminalize those who, like my grandfather, passed his rifle down to me when I was 17 years old, living in rural.
So this is for new purchases.
This is for new purchases. I understand this district sometimes it's 20, 25, 30 minutes before law enforcement can show up, and you have to be able to protect yourself.
Do you believe that school districts should arm their teachers or school officials?
No. Anytime you get more firearms in the situation, it's a problem.
More firepower is not the solution?
More firepower is not the solution. Look what happened in Uvalde. You had an entire police department because they're in there with an AR-15, which is, so people do know, is different than what we carry on the battlefield just because of the semi-automatic to burst selector switch. But you can still do precision shooting for that. And those sorts of things shouldn't be in the hands of people. And we could talk to people who live up in Watertown exactly about how much training it takes for those.
Should the United States do anything different than than what it is currently doing when it comes to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia?
First of all, we should not be. I would not support sending U.S. troops there. I think that you will end up getting into a worse situation.
What happens if, so there's obviously this talk of a threat of nuclear weapons. And first of all, do you think that is a serious threat?
I think there is some. I don't think that he will use it.
If he did, what should be NATO's and the United States response?
I'm not a big fan of nuclear weapons. I'm just not. If nuclear weapons were used, most likely it wouldn't be used against Ukraine. It'd probably be used against Western Europe. If that does happen, we may be stuck in a situation where we have to respond.
Should Ukraine be admitted to NATO?
I do believe they should be. And I've actually worked on NATO operations, several different NATO operations during my time in service.
Short term, long term, who's the bigger threat, Russia or China?
Short term, Russia. Long term, China.
I want to ask you about one last question, then we'll finish up as we go. Only because you have Seneca County in your district.
Mm-hmm.
You said you're a Native American. If you're elected, will you play a role in the ongoing issues related to the Cayuga and Senecas?
I will tell you that is an issue, just not here.
Right.
That is an issue so where I grew up in Old Town, spelled like Miami, Florida, but it's pronounced Miami. The Seneca, the one piece of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy that left here were the Seneca Cayuga Nation. And they moved back to where I'm from in Oklahoma. That's one of the 9 tribal agencies there. I am probably going to get involved with this.
So you wouldn't excuse yourself?
I wouldn't. I would listen to both the traditionalist side with Chief George and it's kind of sort of the more modern side when Halftown.
Have you met with either of them?
I have not.
Okay.
We have put feelers out to both of them. I'll just tell you, because of the Supreme Court decision attacking tribal sovereignty, a lot of them are just skittish of talking to anybody right now. But I know I know a beating of Native American ancestry. This is an issue both important here and to people I know back in Oklahoma. I'm probably going to be asked to get involved with Secretary Holden.
So one of the issues is that the target of a lot of criticism here is the Bureau of Indian Affairs,
yes.
The BIA. Would you do anything to reform them?
I'll be honest, I'm not a big fan of the BIA. To me, that kind of smacks of federal government involvement in tribal sovereignty, because I believe that tribal agencies should be able to police themselves and to police their own people the way that treaties such as contained within the Two-Row Wampum are supposed to be. But the federal government coming in and determining who the leadership is, I just don't think is a good policy. I think it should be left to more traditional. So if that kind of shows maybe a way that I slant on that, I'm going to listen to both. I'm going to listen to Chief George's side. I'm going to listen to Clint Halftown's side. And because I am very familiar with tribal governance, we'll go from there.
I want to thank you for your time over the last hour. We've had in the studio Stephen Holden, who's on the Democratic line running for the new 24th Congressional District, which covers 12 counties. As we have said during the show several times, we invited both Mr. Holden and Congresswoman Tenney to appear for a forum, as is past practice. When one candidate either doesn't respond or doesn't get back to us, which is the case with Congresswoman Tenney, we do give a period of time to their opponent to come in here for a one-on-one interview. It was very nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Be well on the campaign trail. What, about 28 days to go?
Just a little bit under 4 weeks. It's a lot of hard work. We drive end to end in the district probably 4 times a week. And I just want to give this time to thank all of the hundreds of people who are working out there in all of these 12 different counties as a special thank you. They've been in it for the long haul, seen many different iterations of where we're going to be running and different opponents. And so I just want to say as a thank you to all of those people who have been supporting us from day one.
And we want to thank you for giving your time and going out on the campaign trail, but also coming here to share your views with our viewers.
Always a pleasure.
Next week, we'll continue our annual series of election forums. We have forums planned for the new 48th Senate District. That has Senator Rachel May facing off Onondaga County Legislator Julie Abbott, who have both accepted our invitation. And just before we came on, we were told by Justin Coretti, who's on the conservative line, that work commitments do not allow him to participate next week. Then we will have the final forum that we will have is for the new 126th Assembly District, and that has Assemblyman John Lamondes, who has been here in the studio before, as well as his Democratic opponent, Bruce McBain. They have both accepted. As is past practice, as I've been talking about, Jeremy Boyer is the person who will ask the question, the executive editor of The Citizen. I'll be here to moderate, and we'll go from there. We'd like to let you know that you can send us your ideas for questions or thoughts for future guests on Inside Government and be on the front page, because we'll return starting the week of the 25th on that. You can send them to cozguytho@aol.com. I'm Guy Cosentino for Community College. We want to thank you for watching. Be safe, mask up, get vaccinated, and we'll see you back in the studio on Tuesday.